All right. Hey, David, thank you so much for joining me and hanging out with me a little bit today in this strange time where we've got to Zoom in or get a
Yeah,
call.
I know that's right, man. Well, glad to be here. Glad to get a chance to chat with you, brother.
Yeah, man. I love catching up with you anytime. And hey, but tell me how your family is doing right now with all this craziness. How are you enjoying?
That's good. Yeah, Joy and I are doing well. We don't have any children, so we aren't homeschooling. So that's that's been good.
Thank
Not
you, Jesus, right
I
now.
know that's right. Felt like we made a wise decision. Um, and so yeah, but we're doing good, man. You never know how good your marriage is or is not until it deals with some pressure. And so with us being at home with each other all the time, it's been good, man. Got a lot more dinners in, got a lot more walks in, you know,
That's so cool, man. Yeah,
watching
if
with
your
each other. It's
marriage
been
is
good.
bad, walking into a quarantine, then it's over, right?
Yeah, it's over. Yeah, but it's been good,
Man,
man. It's been good.
I'm so glad to hear that, dude. So glad to hear that. I've cherished your friendship for a long time. We've known
Yeah,
each other, I think, over 20
yeah,
years.
20 years. Yeah, it's crazy.
Uh, man, going back to VCU, bro,
I know that's right.
and you at WEAG and the West End Assembly of God kind of
Yeah,
brought us together,
yeah,
and man, it just I loved how our relationship over the years. I've watched you just there's so many different times, and you've watched me in different
yeah,
stages of life.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
been pretty cool,
Yeah,
man.
it has been really good.
Yeah, and I cherish this friendship a lot too, David, because as you know, I call you a lot when cultural issues hit,
Yeah, yeah,
and especially regarding racial tension, because I know you've made it your life's ministry to not just make to be in the moment, but you've really created a movement
yeah.
that flows through all of these cultural moments that recognizes this. So, when Ahmaud Arbery was shot down and killed uh, over 2 months ago, I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, right, right, right,
And,
right.
and the world became aware of it this week.
Yeah.
And I called my friend David Bailey. I said, man, I just want, because I learned so much from your perspective
Yeah.
on this. And if anyone's watching and they don't know, on February 23rd, this young 25-year-old is running through a neighborhood, and the video is horrific, just horrific. And just to hear the gunshots and to see two white males chasing Ahmaud down on this run, supposedly believing he's someone else, or
Yeah.
believing uh, something else that regarding, and that's such a painful thing in itself, man. And I'll
Right.
talk to you a little bit about getting some perspective of this. But I also want to, before I even go there, Wanda Cooper Jones is his mom, and yesterday was Ahmaud's birthday.
Yep. Yep.
I can't even imagine. I have a 26-year-old son,
Mm-mm-mm.
and he's a runner actually, and he grew up running. He's run competitively all the way through high school and college, and he got hooked on his first race with his old man. And, but I don't worry about. I've never worried about what neighborhood he's running in or what's going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I can't imagine that. But I'd love for you to just share. And normally you and I just have a conversation. We rap on the
Yeah.
phone about this. But thanks for joining me publicly anyway.
Yeah.
But maybe shed some light on how this hits you.
Yeah, man. I mean, well, that's a yeah, man, that's a great question. God has called me into a ministry, right, where I kind of feel like I didn't choose the work of reconciliation. It kind of chose me. Like I just kind of orchestrated things in my life that made this a passion. And it's not even just only like quote unquote racial reconciliation, but it's actually just the acknowledgement of the brokenness that's going on in the world. And and how can we partner with Christ in the reconciling of all things, and that includes culture, race, class, our relationship with God, our relationship with one another, and so it's comprehensive. But even in the midst of that, with a calling, I mean, I experience these things in a very embodied way. Like I still am embodied as a Black man, and I've been shaped in almost 40 years of like in that experience, And so I remember when you think about how am I doing with this, I'm reminded of in 1903, a guy named W. Du Bois wrote a book called Souls of Black Folk,
Wow.
and he came up with this concept called the double consciousness. That he says that like a Black man in America has to both think through the double consciousness of being a man and doing whatever it is that he's going to do. So, for example, going for a jog. But then that double consciousness, when the Black body, particularly the Black male, is perceived as a threat, you also have to go for a jog in a way that manages other people's perception of you as a threat.
Wow.
And so, I mean, that's something that you just learn, and you're like, in some ways, I mean, yes, your parents teach you that, but so that you can kind of survive and not get in situations of trouble. But then also, like, even if somebody taught you that, you learn that, And so, I was thinking about this with during this quarantine, where I got to wear a mask. I don't know where my mask is right now, but like, I had to go with one of my board members, the treasurer of my board, into Wells Fargo to do some banking business,
Right. Right.
and I had to go in the bank wearing a mask. Like I had a visceral reaction to this, and was very thankful that I was with an older, tall white man. like, like,
That
and
is
it's
so
like,
sad, and to have that be, it's comical, but man, that's been your reality of that's just it isn't like you don't even think about that anymore,
I
probably. You just
no,
always
I mean
shape
it's
yourself.
just what you think. I mean, it's just like what you do, and I've never done anything criminal in my life. Like
Right.
I've never, but whenever I get stopped by a police officer, like I remember when I was 12 years old, like my first, and again, my first perception of a police officer was my uncle. You remember that TV show 21 Jump Street?
Oh yeah, man, absolutely.
So, I mean, I don't know, like in grade school when that show was out. And my uncle was an undercover cop.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh man, my uncle is cool because he's like, they first on like 21 Jump Street. And all the way until I was 12 years old, that was what my perception of police officers were. But I had a band that started when I was about 11, and some of the guys were 4 years older than me. So when I was 12, there was another guy that was 16 that just bought a car, and remember Haven and Jeff and all those guys from Holy Nation Band?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean all those guys, like, they got pulled over after rehearsal, slammed on the ground,
What?
and it was like, and just, I mean, and had to go to court because like over this, and all they had was musical instruments. I mean, we're
This was
church
at VC.
boys.
This was at VCU.
No, we're teenagers at this point. This is like that band started
Oh
when we were like
man.
11, 12.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
And
I didn't
so
know them until much later.
you
So
didn't know until later, yeah. But I mean, but we were like, Jeff was 16, and he was the first out of the car. We just left rehearsal. They got stopped and pulled over and slammed on the ground and all of that kind of stuff. And right there, like that experience
mm,
taught my body to fear officers.
mm.
And I've never done drugs in my life. I can't tell you how many times I've been stopped for drugs and searched for drugs. And my only experience even being around drugs is with college educated white people. Like it was like 2 experiences in college, and I was like, yo, I got to get out of here. And so it's just such a, so how I experienced this, man, it's like, it's hard to, it's, I experienced it like, man, I mean, that could have been me. Like nobody's asking, are you a minister? you're in these spaces? Like nobody's asking questions about like how educated you are or what your experience is. Do you have a family or any of those type of things? I mean, this stuff happens all of the time. And so, I mean, I'm experiencing it in two ways. I mean, one as a vocation and you know, two as an embodied African-American man in America.
Well, this is why I love talking to you so much, David, just to add perspective. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and there's a lot of racial tension my whole life growing up. And, you've described this. When I hear you describe, during the 30s, 40s, and 50s, how the system was designed for division.
Yeah.
Because that was the result. And, and it's not a broken system. It actually was designed by broken people.
Yeah.
And man, I grew up with, you can just pick, and probably lots of people who are listening, they can just picture which neighborhood, I knew which neighborhood I could run through, which neighborhood I couldn't run through.
Yeah.
The different immigrant neighborhoods,
the
white neighborhoods, the black neighborhoods. But my perspective is completely, like I said, I have a 26-year-old son, never thought about him being, other than cars hitting him, I make sure you wear your vest,
Yeah.
I didn't think wear a bulletproof vest, like if that was
right.
Gosh, and your perspective. So when you and I hear this going on, and when average person, and again, we don't know a lot about Ahmaud. I don't know anything about his history or background, this is one of these moments though, that doesn't seem like there's much debate. You know how there's been, you could go back and name whatever the shooting of the month or of the really big crisis of the year. And you and I have talked about a lot of those in our personal relationship, but this one seems different to me. And I'm wondering what your perspective of why this is so different, because for one, the white community is not debating like, well, what was he doing in that neighborhood? No one's saying, talking there. I'm sure there are, that's going to happen, or as a case comes out, who knows, but it doesn't matter. Like for the first time since I can remember for a long time, like it literally doesn't matter. Two men chased down another man and shot him. And two white men chased down a black man who was running in their neighborhood. So why do you think this is so different?
Well, I mean, it's kind of, I'm going to answer the question with two questions, because one question is we have to ask ourselves the question, why in a system of like, we live in a place of a system of law, right? Like when somebody does something wrong, there are processes and procedures that you're supposed to go through. And it's interesting when we have these conversations and you hear about a kind of a racialized situation, a black man is killed, the questions about that black man's character is oftentimes in credit. It's like, which kind of underpin is like, did he deserve it? But what's really important to understand is, like, let's just say the person is wrong. Like,
let's say he did rob a house. Or
they robbed a house, or just whatever case would be. Like, I mean, one is we don't live in a country where you could just commit martial law, right? We live in a country where you get arrested. You're supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Even in Georgia law, you can carry a weapon, you can make a citizen's arrest, but that means follow and call the police and wait till they get there, not drive the truck around, chase them down, pull out a shotgun and try to hold him there at gunpoint or whatever their thought was.
I mean, this isn't the Wild Wild West. Like, this isn't kind of colonial dueling culture like time, right? Like, we got laws, processes, and procedures. And so the one question we have to ask is, why does the character of the victim matter? Like in a situation like this, when we have systems and laws in place, and part of this has to do with how we've been shaped for many years, you know?
Yeah.
Another question to ask is like, why is there a right part of town to run on and a wrong part of town to run on? And you referenced kind of how our cities were built in 1930s, 40s, and 50s. There's a really great book called The Color of Law that talks about this, that let's say, for example, if I had a black son and you had a white daughter, our cities, like I wish I could tell you that 400 of our cities that were built from 1930s and 1950s were designed in any other type of way. But the biggest question that our cities, the way they were designed during the 1930s and 50s, was they didn't want, if I had a black son and you had a white daughter, they didn't want them to grow up together, to go to school together, to fall in love, them to meet, and to have a mixed race baby. Like that was literally from the 1930s to 50s. And so that's why we have black neighborhoods and Hispanic neighborhoods, or immigrant neighborhoods and black neighborhoods. Like these are how our cities were done. And so we got to ask ourselves the question of like, why that's the case, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you also ask this question of like, man, I'm sorry, man, I forgot the original question.
Like just why this is so different, like than the other shootings and things that you and I have talked over the years. This is like, seems universal.
And I think part of the reason why this is different is because this reminds us of Emmett Till. You know, my dad was about 6 or 8 years old when, like, Emmett Till happened, and my uncle, was around that age, and they call it that Emmett Till generation, where they could see a young boy that was around the age. And you got to think about how long in the history of our country, I mean, for centuries, for hundreds of years, you could have a black man could be accused of doing anything and could be executed for hundreds. Like it didn't even really become illegal till you really couldn't deal with consequences. I mean, people were still getting assassinated, like in the 60s.
Yeah.
So it really went to the 70s and 80s that it wasn't normative, right? And at least for people to be like, hey, that's not right, it wasn't like growing held accountable to the 70s and 80s, really. And so this feels like a flashback to like Emmett Till, and back into that period of time. And the thinking is like, man, shouldn't we have gotten past this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as a white community watches, I can tell you that there's shame and guilt that comes over when you watch this video. And I'm not recommending, by the way, anybody could necessarily go watch this video. Yeah. His mom, Wanda Cooper Jones, said she'll never watch it, understandably. But when you watch a man get chased down, it's like you're watching a modern day lynching.
Yeah.
And that term's been thrown around, and it's so painful.
Yeah.
I'm wondering too, David, what is it? Give me perspective from the African-American community when they see, because, first of all, you have a lot of issues in this case, justice issues, and we could talk a lot about those kinds of things, but, until the video came out, over 2 months went by when his mama was at home praying for justice.
Yeah, God.
And then until the Georgia Bureau investigation got involved, then, of course, in a few days' time, but with media pressure and all of that. But in that media pressure is a lot of people like myself speaking out. Certainly this isn't my first time, but you live here. Yeah. This is your ministry and your life. But how does it feel to the African-American community when yesterday was #run with Maud, and I did my 2.23 miles and blew my Achilles, by the way.
Gosh.
But I mean, you know, I said it before, like my Achilles will heal. The broken heart of a mother is never going to heal. But when the white community suddenly hashtags this and it becomes a social media movement, how does that feel? Does it feel, it feels disingenuous? I wonder, and I worry about this sometime, David. Can you shed some light? Does it feel like, hey, where have you been? Where have you been in every month or every year that these different shootings and things happen? How does this hit you?
It's a good question, man. And I think it's just important to understand. I mean, just like the white community and the African American community, there's a spectrum of perspectives, right? And I think there's some folks who are like, hey, like, yeah, where have you been? You know? And I think there's a reasonable thing, you know, like,
Sure.
I mean, this is like a thing that's been going on for centuries, you know, like,
yeah.
I mean, you think about this, when it comes to the U.S. government, when it comes to the kind of policing in America, or just the justice system, tell me what year was the year where African Americans should trust the system? Like,
right, when the housing changed in 1968, and then, but it really didn't, because now the banks could do mortgages to whatever neighborhood they want. I mean, it just, you could go one after the other.
It's so many situations that, like,
the system, yeah.
I mean, like, when should you trust the system? You know, I mean, whether it's the political system, I mean, like, Democrats ain't any more for black people than Republicans are, and vice versa, right? Like, Bill Clinton gave some of the worst law enforcement legislation, and you know, then some of the Republican folks have done, and you have folks like Newt Gingrich currently now is trying to undo some of that stuff, you know.
So does some of that distrust transfer in this case, like you said, for the African American community, when people start jumping in? Is it bandwagon fans kind of?
I mean, like, it's complicated, right?
The Patriots in the Super Bowl suddenly, you know, or
right. I mean, I think it's kind of like, I think folks who are like, you know, real active that do this like day in, day out, you know, could see it that way. And then I think there's another side to it that's like, we just live in a social, I heard somebody call it social slacktivism culture, where, you know, folks like King and the NAACP, like the NAACP was started in 1909, I believe. The Brown versus Board of Education case wasn't won in the Supreme Court till 1954. These folks spent decades working on trying to make a change. Like, that's a true activist. Us doing hashtag run with Ahmaud is not doing activism, but yet we feel like it is, you know? And I think, I mean, that's just part of our culture in general, right? Like stuff is like really cheap, you know?
Sure.
And I think what folks want to think through is like, hey, all right, I could do something on Twitter, I can have a conversation, but I think maybe for white brothers and sisters, could ask themselves, what can I do that's of substance over a period of time to help change this brokenness that's going on? And I think any person that's really about this mission, whether they're a person of color, African American, or white person, can expect and appreciate this as like, hey, this is 1, 2, or 3 things that I'm going to do over a period of time to be faithful. That's a little bit more than a hashtag. That's a little bit more than a conversation.
Yeah,
and that's how I would think about it.
And is it true too? I mean, does it discount the hashtag or the impact of that? Because there's certainly another side to this too, where it's bringing. You and I talked about this briefly on the phone when we said, "Hey, let's switch this to a Zoom call." So let's just let everyone listen in on our conversation. And in that conversation, I was saying, I was just sharing my heart with you and saying, I feel like this is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Which is why the Zoom call came up, because I feel like it's an opportunity where, it's a moment for some people.
Yeah, yeah.
But in order for a moment to become a movement, you need to be present in the moment and
Yeah,
feel the brokenness and
yeah,
feel the grief.
yeah.
I just shared this passage recently in Philippians where it says regarding the pandemic, which was, talking about this idea that making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil.
That's good. That's good.
And I was talking about a pandemic and not
Yeah,
a pandemic that, Kirk Franklin went on his post and said, hey, not to make light of the world pandemic we're in, but to shed some light here that we've been living in a racial pandemic in this tension.
yeah,
But here's an opportunity. I mean, the hashtag is an opportunity, and let's not discount that. But at the same time, let's accept the reality. I love what you just said, man, because I know your heart, David. You don't look down at anybody who's hashtagging or you're just glad they're in the conversation.
yeah, yeah,
I know that's your heart. And
yeah.
so when I hear and I want everyone else to hear that too, because what are some of the next steps for us? How do we someone's trying to get past that right now? Our nation's going to grieve that and should grieve this.
Yeah, yeah.
But what are some steps to move past the hashtag?
And even like on the hashtag, right? Like I think so. Let me just step back and say one thing that, like, for us, a pillar in becoming what we call a reconciling community. One of the pillars in doing this is that you see reconciliation as spiritual formation.
It's good.
That you see that, like, God, like Christ is reconciling all things, and God is inviting us to partner with Christ in the reconciling all things. And it's not that I'm just trying to fix the brokenness that's outside. I'm trying to also fix the like work with God to fix the brokenness inside. And so transform people, transform communities, right? And that is how Christian transformation happens. It's not that, like, I get in trouble when I try to fix Shane. But
Yeah.
like when I like go in and like David Bailey tries to at least engage in a journey of transformation, and prayerfully out of my journey of transformation, Shane is transformed, and for those who Shane influences is also being transformed. And that's the way that reconciliation works in Christian ethos, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we want to do is realize that, we have conversions at different periods of time.
Yeah.
So even in my own life, right? Like I had a conversion about, like, I was kind of indifferent. I wasn't antagonistic to immigrant communities. I was kind of like, man, like if somebody wants to come to America and work hard, and they definitely do jobs that I don't even think about doing. Like,
right.
I have a college degree. I mean, I'm not.
They can have that job.
Yeah, I'm above. I mean, like it's like I'm not above doing it if I need to do it, but I'm just like, why am I going to be upset with somebody that's doing migrant work? Because that's a blessing to me when I go to the grocery store, right? And so it just that didn't make sense to me, and so I was really indifferent until I'm in my my dining room, having a conversation with a friend who, when he was 18 years old, he walked over here and had to work 2 years as an indentured servant. And I was like, I'm going to call him Carlos. I'm going to say, Carlos, did that really happen? Did that still happen today? He's like, David, yes, where have you been? This is like, why do you think your bananas are 49 cents? And I was like, yo.
So that made it real for you. That moment became more than a moment. That was something that took.
And I'm the like cultural diversity guy, right? Like I'm like, and I didn't know that story. And so even like COVID, right? Like I'm thinking about how it affects my ministry organization.
Yeah.
And then I hear some Christian Asian American friends of mine that talk about xenophobia and just the kind of like
the Chinese virus or
and like literally like people threatening them and their lives and both personhood and all that stuff. And I just didn't know, like, because I don't know anybody that responds in that kind of way.
Well,
And
you could think this, that's when you sit at home in a quarantine, you could start thinking that's when conspiracy theories happen.
right,
You know, like this isn't true. The government's
right,
lying to us.
right,
But yeah, that's offensive. That your post was offensive because my brother has COVID-19.
right,
My
right.
sister, my wife's a first responder, you know, and they go, you know, what is your experience, you know, and that's what makes it real to you. I love that. That's so
Yeah,
true.
and it's kind of like you're just not going to be quote unquote woke about every single thing, right?
Yeah,
And so I showed up late to the like I'm more acute to the African American pain. I'm not as acute to the Hispanic experience. I'm not as acute to the Asian American experience. And I have relationships with people, or I read, you know, I see different things come through, and I'm like, oh, there's a whole lot of pain going on in the world, and I could be invited to do something about it, right?
yeah,
So I think like wherever you come in on the space, nobody is woke their whole life. Like, and we have conversion points at different periods of time. And I think we need to allow God to work in us. And I think that we need to give room for God to work in other people.
yeah,
Because we just aren't all in the same space, but I think we can allow God to work and God and the Holy Spirit to
yeah.
do the work the Holy
I
Spirit
mean,
does.
that's the key, right? So, I mean, thank God, the Holy Spirit, you and I are both Pentecostals background. So we, you know, we get it, but it doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah.
Uh, God has an aspect of him in the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit that meets you exactly where you are today.
Yeah.
So if maybe some of us are late to this conversation,
Yeah.
um, don't leave this conversation.
Yeah.
Let the Holy Spirit meet you where you are and take you another step further,
Yeah.
is what I hear you saying. And I love that about you, David. I love that you've been gracious with me for 20 years that we've known each other.
Yeah.
You know, you've stayed in a conversation with me even when I didn't get it, and as you were ahead of me in this conversation, you led me. But you did so graciously, staying in the conversation, even though when we talk about what, you know, church needs to do or what the church needs to become, you know, you have a perspective that I don't have. And what would you say to people coming new into this conversation? Um, what would be some practical suggestions you would have for our white brothers and sisters coming new into this conversation? What would be some practical things you would say? Hey, just these few simple things.
Yeah. So here are the 5 pillars of becoming a reconciling community. And this is what we work with communities and organizations with. Number 1 is to understand that reconciliation is about spiritual formation. It's about us being transformed. And so if you find yourself having a visceral reaction against this conversation in general, then it's like pause and ask God about that.
Yeah.
Like to say, hey, Lord, how do you want me to be transformed in this conversation?
Yeah.
The second thing is to increase your cultural intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people talk about, hey, we need to be culturally sensitive. My wife doesn't want me to be sensitive to her needs. She actually wants me to be intelligent to her needs, right? Like not just like I'm kind of like one is kind of like reactive and trying to prevent from messing up. Another one is like knowing what to do and what not to do and exercising some wisdom. It's both knowledge and wisdom, right? And that's kind of what we need about culture. And we need kind of skills. Like you're not going to know how to do every single thing in every type of situation. But what you could do is get certain kind of be in a process of growing in your cultural skills to kind of know how to navigate, and you learn how to listen and how to respond. If you're missing one another, how do I try to find some spaces what to do? So then this goes to the third thing is you need to understand that we have diverse shared narratives. That, you know, just because like you could share an experience and I say, you know what, Shane, I was there, you know, I was at VCU the same time you were there. And like, no way that could have happened because I didn't experience that. You know, and like we dismiss each other, but we actually need to listen into like, hey, this was your experience. I'm not familiar with that experience, and lean into that.
Don't just give in to the fact that we were there at the same time, but embrace the fact that you had a different experience at the same event that I was at.
Yes, and help me to learn more, right? In our country, we have like Europeans have had a very different experience than indigenous First Nations people. First Nations people have very different experience than African people, than like Asian immigrants, and so on and so on, the descendants of those folks. And so we just need to learn, right? We just need to learn from each other. And so I definitely recommend doing a lot of reading, you know, particularly reading from narratives of people that's very different than you,
Yeah.
and try to like learn. And then like as you've kind of done some learning, instead of saying like, hey, you know, person of color, can you teach me something that I haven't done work on my own on? At least you'll be like, hey, I was reading this book and here was a perspective. And can we have a conversation about that? That's just such a more honoring way of engaging in this conversation. It's kind of like when you go overseas, you could do the arrogant American thing and talk in English and and do things like the way we do things in America.
Yeah.
Or you could learn a couple of
Tell
cultural
people in
cues.
France that you'd be speaking German if it weren't for me.
Right. Right. And like say for example, like you could also like learn a couple of French words, learn a couple some of the cultural customs, and then you could, you know, and even if you mess up and stumble through it, people give you grace
That's good.
because you're honoring their culture, right? And
Yeah.
I would say like, hey, spend some time doing that. And then just the fourth and fifth piece is engage in some cross-cultural collaboration, right? Like
Mhm.
we really need each other in order to fix the brokenness that's going on in the world. And in order to fix the brokenness that's going on in the world, we have to create new culture. We're here today because of the culture that was made yesterday. If we want to see something different tomorrow, we have to create new culture today. And
Yeah.
so don't just think you can do that by yourself. Really try to find some cross-cultural collaboration. And like, that's something that you and I talk about. Like we try to collaborate on stuff. I mean, we did it back at VCU.
Yeah.
You're pastor in the church. I'm leading the ministry. In 2017, I can't believe it's been
Yeah.
that
It was
long.
actually 3 years ago, the other month,
Yeah,
March
March. Yeah, yeah,
2017. Yeah.
yeah. And we worked on that conference together, and we just try to find ways to collaborate together. We need each other. I mean,
Good.
that's not a theoretical thing.
Yeah.
If anything we learn in this country is that we really, really need each other.
I think the fact that we need each other is the key to it too, David, because instead of looking at it like you can help advance me,
Yeah.
uh, realizing the need is far deeper than that.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
that's good. And the fifth one,
That was the fifth one. So
that's the
the
fifth one.
the
Sorry.
fourth one was the collaboration. The fifth one is that we
Okay.
need the culture making. We actually need to make stuff. We just can't sit around and talk about stuff all day. We
Yeah.
actually need to like engage in making things together.
Hey, you mentioned my church, West End Assembly of God, and you and I have long history there too.
Yeah.
I've been a part of this community over almost 20 years now, and I've watched it grow. And we're a church community that's growing in our diversity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you've made some great suggestions for our white brothers and sisters. What would you say to our African American community about allow embracing people into this conversation? Because and kind of the kind of grace that you've had with we've talked about things like white guilt and shame and those things that just don't have place, that Jesus came to free us from. And how do we what would you say to both communities, or and specifically you've mentioned our white brothers and sisters, but our African American brothers and sisters, about engaging in this conversation as well?
Yeah. Well, one of the things you want to do, particularly if I'm talking to like African American or people of color that's in your congregation, you want to ask like, hey, I have a unique grace and call in this area. You got to ask yourself the question: do I have a similar grace and call? Do I have a desire for it? Do I even or do I even have that kind of grace? Because everybody doesn't have the grace to be able to educate and teach people about such a significant
Big.
challenge, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't have the grace for it, don't feel bad that you don't have the grace for it.
Yeah. I
You
just
know?
not going to be the conversation you lead in or
Yeah, yeah. And it's just like, hey, you know, realize like I have my experience of trying to figure out this thing on my own, you know, and refer them to Arrabon ministry, you know, like or just, and that's fine, but don't feel guilty. I think a lot of times people feel pressure to talk about things that they talk about. So for example, just because I'm a man and stereotype says that men need to be able to fix stuff around the house, I don't have that grace. My wife is Mrs. Fix It, and like I don't feel that pressure to try to act like I know what to do.
that's right. That's good.
And so that's one
We
thing.
need to let people be who they are and who they're
Yeah.
created to be. Yeah. That's good.
I think another thing too is that you need to make sure that you put your face mask on before you try to like have to put somebody else on. This is kind of reference to back in the day when people used to fly planes, and like they always say like if the air pressure goes down, put your face mask on before you try to put somebody else's on, help somebody else.
That's right.
And I do that. Like I'm a
Put
public
your own
figure.
oxygen mask on.
Yeah, own oxygen mask on. So I do that a couple of ways. Like one, Don Coleman's a guy I've been
Love Don. I just spoke with him the other day, and this was again what you said. We need each other. I reached out to him during the pandemic, and just how can we partner? How can we collaborate?
Yeah,
that's good. But go ahead. But Don.
I mean, he's like what some folks call like a spiritual director. He's been like a spiritual father. Like he's been like a guy that I've been walking with for like 20 years or so.
For our city, but for
me, yeah, for our city, but also for me personally, And so I get with him twice a month, at least every other week, just to talk through everything in life and to make sure that I put my own oxygen mask on. I meet with a counselor. I meet with a therapist once a month, to process through these things. I have a group of friends who I don't have to do any code switching with and talk through stuff and process things and process pain. And so make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your soul in these spaces. I think a lot of times things end up getting sideways because folks aren't processing their own pain. And so sometimes I'm just going to use you for an example. Shane calls me up and I haven't processed my own pain in a situation, then I blast him. It has nothing to do with Shane. It just has the fact that I just didn't process my own pain. And so I think that's something that you really need to know how to do. And, if you got questions about that, we have one of the things we've done as a ministry is develop like these identity processing groups to kind of help, because what reconciliation is required for people of colors was different than what's required for white people. There's some stuff that's shared, but the burden also time is shared differently, distributed differently. Yeah. And so, I think that's another thing. And then the last thing I would leave you with is to realize that humans were made on the sixth day, and when they slept and woke up the next day, the very first thing that God had them to do was a rest. And so we need to work out of rest versus work to rest. And so some of us are very exhausted. Yeah. Because we aren't rested. Like we're doing the stuff out of just work with no rest. But to kind of turn things off. So you got to think about it. Like I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and I just I'm gonna let you know, I didn't watch the video. Yeah. Like part of my grace in calling is to kind of understand how messed up stuff is, to understand like the nature of sin, so that I can kind of get some kingdom perspective on these different things. And so a little bit of it's like I remember when my dad sat down and talked to me about sex when I came age appropriate. Like he gave me kind of like, it was an awkward conversation, but he kind of gave me like,
good to know yours wasn't any different than anyone else.
He gave me the kind of like, kind of the basic thing, but he didn't sit down and like look at a porno with me, right? Like,
right. We're not going to draw a picture on this one.
Yeah. And it's like, I didn't need those kind of images in my head because it wouldn't have been good for my soul. Right. Yeah. Now, when you think about some of these things, like that's kind of like these topics, sometimes you need to be able to there's sometimes you need to know just enough to kind of know the details, but you don't need to know enough that can disrupt your soul.
Yeah.
And you gotta be careful to pay attention to those things, because the internet can be so malforming, and we need to pay attention to, like, hey, is my consumption of media, how is that forming my soul?
Well, it's
So
that
those are things
Philippians. It's that Philippians passage of, take the most of every opportunity, uh, because the days are evil. And then it says, don't be drunk with wine. It goes through this whole
yes,
list, right? Because, and whatever your wine is today, it could be just vegging out and
yeah,
streaming, or media, or
yeah,
news, or whatever you're feeding your soul and your
yeah,
mind with, right? And I just love, David, this idea of God meeting us where we're at,
yeah,
especially in this conversation, because we're so broken. I've heard you describe this before, like racial reconciliation is like this big puzzle.
yeah,
It's like, the picture is Revelation 21 when we
yeah,
worship together, uh, but I think we worship together well, especially in our church. We're a very diverse church. Your church is very, very diverse church, but um, we worship well together. I don't know if we walk well together.
yeah, yeah.
And I think I love the way you describe it as a puzzle piece at a time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, even think about like Revelation 21, and I can't remember if it gets to 22 yet, but like it talks about the tree of life being for the healing of the nation.
Mm.
So it's not just like there's an intersection between worship and mission. And so, I mean, I've heard Piper say it like this in his book, Let the Nations Be Glad. He said that where worship ends, mission begins, where mission begins, worship ends. And so it's like those two things, like mission leads to worship, worship leads to mission.
Yeah.
And why? Because worship leads to mission, and mission is ultimately for the healing of the nations, right?
Mm-hmm.
They like if you I'm just been like bathing in Isaiah,
Mm.
and like it's so wild because God's like, Israel, you haven't been right, but Assyria, you've been wrong. And then like there's all of these, and like Hezekiah is about to like, some people about to roll up on Hezekiah, and then Hezekiah is, has to build an alliance, and you got Ethiopia. I mean, it's just like all of this like drama of
Yeah.
the nations have always been at each other since the
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah. And then
And
Hezekiah, right? He's like this, such a godly man. And then he shows the arrogance at the end of inviting another country in
yes,
to show off like he's some great here. And then the relationship gets distorted all over again. It goes to
yes,
the next generation again.
yeah. And then you look at it like, it's like, this is the reason why we need the Messiah, right? Like, that's what Isaiah is saying. Like, and it's interesting too, because when you look at it, Isaiah is really all about justice and the temple. It's about mission and worship, right?
Mm.
And the calling of the Messiah is not just only to heal Israel spiritually, but politically, economically, sociologically. Like, the Messiah was this comprehensive expectation of what was going on. And this is the invitation that Christ is dwelling in, the healing of the nation. That's ultimately where we're going towards. And so
And
that's what
you do talk about building reconciling communities, right? I mean,
yeah, totally.
people think like, well, that's all about unity and love and peace. It's like, hey, that's about conflict.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah, totally.
it's not just all peace and I mean, peacemakers, blessed are the peacemakers, are not the quiet ones. They're the ones
No.
who are
Yep.
willing to go into the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, conflict, we should see conflict as not something to avoid, but as an opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you think about any growth comes out of like overcoming resistance, if I want to become stronger, I don't become stronger from avoiding lifting weights. I actually like have to continue to like lift weights and become sore so that I can have the progress of growing these kind of muscles. And that's what conflict is. Like, reckless conflict is like, it's for transformation. It's for
Yeah.
like the opportunity, and God doesn't care if David's right or if Shane's right if we have a conflict. God cares about how do I treat my brother, how
Yeah.
do I position myself in a way to be transformed by God, and out of that pursuing of transformation, then God begins to do a lot of different stuff within that context. And so that's as Christians how we need to be positioned in this space,
Yeah.
no matter where you are in this conversation.
David, that's awesome. And I think that's a great place to let me give you back your day. You've taken your Saturday with me to hang out. And, it's funny. I got lost in our conversation. I have no idea how we've been talking so long, and probably people will tune out and, they'll watch
Right.
2 minutes of this or not. But, I'm just saying this. Normally, I would be more private about this conversation because you and I have had so many of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of our conversations, and I just thought it was such a great idea for a moment to say, hey, if you guys want to listen in on this, you talk about opportunities. We need to make the most of every opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is an opportunity to be in a conversation with someone who looks different than you,
Yeah. Yeah.
who is different than you. And it's not just about looks. I know it's economic, it's background, it's culture,
Education, all this stuff, culture.
yeah, it's about wanting not just different. You say that I've heard you say this. You in order to have a diverse church, you can't just want color. You need to have culture with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only way you know that is to actually engage in conversation. And so whoever's watching, thanks for just watching in on David and I today. What would stretching our knowledge is power, and that's freeing to. And I know you've turned me on to a lot of great books like Ken Witzma and The Myth of Equality.
Yeah.
Cultural justice issues like rethinking incarceration.
Yeah.
And I have a whole stack of them. Is there anything that you would say, hey, this would be a good read right now for people who are looking to just expand their thought regarding racial tension and regarding cultural issues?
Yeah. So I would say, I think I would, again, echo the book by Ken Weitzman called Myth of Equality, because that would kind of help you to see both historically and theologically some of the challenge. And I think he lays that out really, really well. And then, rethinking incarceration, that's about like kind of Matthew 25. And what I really appreciate about Dominique Gilliard, he kind of took kind of like the new Jim Crow or Just Mercy and really made it a great theological treatise, and just help you to kind of understand.
Have you seen that movie yet?
It's so good.
Oh my gosh.
Good.
If you don't like to read a book, go see that movie. That's good.
Yeah. And the book was so good. Like both the movie and the book was really great, and it would kind of even help you to understand the broader context of Ahmaud Arbery and what's kind of happened in that context, I think I would recommend. And then the third book I would probably recommend would be, this is Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. Yeah. Dr. King walked around in his briefcase with this book. And I think like you can do, I forgot our brother says it, but like, you really got to understand how to handle this stuff from a spiritual standpoint, because doing this work for a long period of time, if you aren't connected spiritually, it could really deform you in ways that could be really significant. I think a lot of times people avoid engaging in this because they're scared where it's going to take them. Yeah. But kind of like think about what the promises of Psalms, that like whether I make my bed in Sheol and hell, or if I'm in heaven, like you're there. Though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, you are with me. And so let us not be afraid that as we go down this road that God's not going to be with us. Matter of fact, we probably will find God in ways that we would have blown our minds by receiving this invitation to engage in this work.
Man, I'm so glad that's such a great thing to end on because I think this is, if it's not a spiritual journey
Yeah.
and people begin to read all these and they just start, stacking up the books and
Yeah.
eh, if they don't allow God to take new ground, meet them where they are and
Yeah.
address their own brokenness,
Yeah.
then they're just going to begin to spew out like they're just going to become madness, and more noise into the conversation.
Yeah.
We don't need noise in the conversation. We need that quiet place in that cave, like Elijah said, Lord, pass before me. And it needs to be more than a moment to become a movement. But I have to be in the moment
Yeah.
with God.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you said that because it's got to be a spiritual process, right?
Yeah, and there might be people that might not be readers, and so
Yeah.
a good entry point is that we have that study series called Race Class in the Kingdom of God.
Yeah. Thank you
We
for bringing that up. I almost
yeah,
forgot that. Yeah.
we shot it at Western Assembly of God, and that's a good, like, it's, you can watch these videos are like, I don't know, 15 to 30 minutes at most, and it's about discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
We designed it in a way that you might not have a diverse group of folks. It could be a homogenous group of people and have a really great conversation. You can have a diverse group of people and have a different conversation.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of testimonies of high school students and grandparents having really great conversations, because young people want to have conversations like this, but oftentimes they aren't having these conversations inside the church. And
Yeah.
so this is a great opportunity to have a conversation around the word and the space. And so you can get it at arrabon.com, ARRABON.com. And that's another option for those who, whether you're a reader or not, I recommend it.
Dude, I love partnering with you and Arrabon. West End Assembly of God's a longtime supporter of your ministry, of you
Yeah.
personally, from our missions. Not just, I don't mean just financially, but a mission that we've been partnered together. And
Yeah.
and I remember, by the way, I remember when we shot the conference together. By the way, and that those videos, but that is actually was kind of became a standard of like, what we should be doing. And we began an online journey, by the way, that prepared us
Oh, wow.
to, it was,
Wow.
there were other catalysts that began, but that was one of them.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's pretty cool for me. But more than that, than our partnership, I love your friendship, man.
Yeah, likewise. That's good. Well, man, I'm really glad. Thanks for the invite. Glad we got a chance to have this conversation, man.
Yeah, Kate, can I ask you to do something bold to would you say a prayer
Yeah, sure.
over all the people who might have stuck with us and peered in on our conversation today,
Yeah.
who are struggling for our country, who are grieving, certainly for the Arbery family, for their grief as well, and you know, poor Wanda Cooper Jones and the mom who's going to experience Mother's Day tomorrow. Um, I would love
Yeah,
you.
please, let's do that.
Thank you.
Uh, well, Lord, man. Well, first of all, I just want to just pray for Arbery's mom. I mean,
Mm,
I cannot imagine of what it's like to grieve the death of your son, for his birthday to be on Friday and Mother's Day to be on Sunday.
mm-hmm.
I just, that just sounds like hell on earth for her.
Yeah.
And I just pray, Lord, that you would meet her. I don't know where she is in faith, but
Mm-hmm.
Lord, I pray that you would meet her. I pray that people would shower her with kindness,
Yes.
and that she would see some of the best of humanity. That you would protect her soul in this time, Lord. Yeah, just help people to shower her with love.
Mm,
Lord, I pray for just all the people who have just been listening,
mm,
and have been a part of this conversation, that have like leaned in. Or that I pray that you would just help them to see, like, hey, what is my next step of faithfulness?
mm.
You're not asking anybody to be the next Martin Luther King. Like, you're just asking them to be faithful. I mean, even Martin Luther King didn't set out to be the holiday, like to get a holiday named after him.
Mm-hmm.
Like he felt like a failure most of his life,
Mm-hmm.
and as he was doing this work, you were just asking him to be faithful, and just like you're asking each of us to be faithful. So I pray, Lord, that you would help to reveal to each person like what is their next step of faithfulness in
Mm-hmm.
this area, whether it's to read, whether it's doing a study series, whether it's to take inventory of the things they have influence over. I think for my brother Shane,
Thank
you know,
you.
understanding that, like, I mean, I think for our friendship over, I mean, like, it's kind of wild to be at an age where you're like, man, we've been friends for 20 something years. Like, that's just crazy. You know, it feels like yesterday. And, you know, he's now pastoring a church that's been very influential in Richmond for many years.
Mm.
And he's asking, like, hey, how do I steward the things that you've given me? And I just pray for the Western community, a multi-generational community, a
Thank you.
multi-economic community, a
Mm.
multi-ethnic community, that they just would not just only be a diverse community, but they would become a reconciling community.
Thank you, Lord.
That the different stories and narratives, and they're also, I mean, I would assume they're a politically diverse community also. And
That's
so,
right.
you know, I pray there be a truly kingdom, that
Mm.
folks just won't um, believe that the kingdom of God is exactly the way they think the world should exist, but they really would lean in and say, hey, what's God's heart in this
Mm.
area?
Yeah.
Where am I leaning in God's heart, and where am I falling short of it?
Mm.
Where do I have the blind spots, and what do I do? I pray that you give him wisdom as he endeavors to lead. We thank you for him and all of the pastors and ministers and just the folks of that community.
Thank
Be
you.
with us all in this pretty wild time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen, dude.
Amen.
Thanks
Love
so
you, brother.
much. Go get some gardening done with joy.
I know that's right.
Get on that joy list, bro.
I know that's right. I'm trying to, for real. I'm trying to stay on that joy list too. That's good.
I love it, man. Thank you so much. I
That's
love you,
good.
brother.